So thank you first of all for having me. I'm excited to be here. So propaganda in general has been very attractive because it has used a lot of tools. It has been very innovative. So for example, if we look at Daesh propaganda, it was able to recruit young people from more than 100 different countries. And one of the questions that we should be asking is why, right? And it had several things. The first one is it used a lot of emotional appeals. So it wasn't just rational. It wasn't just saying, trying to recruit by using rational appeals, but using also emotions, where saying to people like, you belong here. If you come here, there's a sense of belonging, a sense of identification, where there's a lot of emotions that is involved. That's number one. The second one is it was very hyper-local. So the recruitment that they used wasn't a one-size-fits-all, but it was actually specific to the local context. So, for example, if there were specific grievances that Daesh knew were happening, say, in the United States, in terms of racism, right? Then when Daesh is trying to recruit, they will try to point out that if you join us, then you will not have to face racism. Of course, we all know that this is propaganda and not true, but they're really able to understand the local context and try to abuse that in a negative way. The third one is with the local context, they were speaking the language of the young people in terms of when they were trying to target, for example, youth in the Maghreb region. They were speaking Darija, right? Young people were able to understand. And so and then the last one is, it was very, for Daesh, the media battlefield is as important as the physical battlefield, which means that for them, they spend a lot of resources in the media. So they had videos, they were interactive, the production level was immense. And so we were not able to counter that with the speed that Daesh used. And so it was interactive, it was hyper-local, it included emotions. All of that adds to the permeability of propaganda if we look at Daesh in specific. Yeah, this is a very good question, and it's a question that we deal with in my work that I currently do. So governments have spent millions of dollars in counter-narratives. But it's not the government's role to do counter-narratives, because we have to look at the grievances. Because counter-narratives, even though they are important, what is important, more important, is what are the counter-offers that we are giving to our young people or people that are joining, meaning what are the alternatives that we are giving. And if governments are spending so much money on counter-narratives, and there's already a lack of trust in many countries between the communities and the governments, it will not work. So it's money really spent in a very non-productive way. That money could be spent to respond to some of the grievances, socio-economic grievances, providing schools, better hospitals, infrastructure, more rights. And so, a lot of times, the messenger is more important than the message itself. And what I mean by this is, counter-narratives are important, but it needs to be spent, but the person who's doing the counter-narratives needs to have trust with the community that they're doing. And I think the government's role is to be able to respond more and look more to the root causes. Why is Daesh being able to be successful in recruiting from these various areas? What can the governments do better so there is more of a binding social contract between the community, where the community feels that they belong? And we have to revert the question and ask, why are many of our youth dreaming of dying instead of dreaming of living? When there's hopelessness, despair, poverty, racism, right? And we have to respond to those issues. And then the last point that I want to make is military fighting only militarily does not does not counter violent ideologies, right? It doesn't. You can bomb a country to Stone Age, but that's not going to remove the violent ideologies. What it might do is it might add more grievances, because now a lot of people have died, saw their sisters and brothers die, the infrastructure is completely gone. So we have to also see what types of prevention can we do? How can we respond with prevention, with responding to the root causes? That's really very important as well. And what we have seen, unfortunately, is a lot of governments have spent so much time putting money on more of a security approach. And what we need is a preventative approach as well, and rebuild trust between governments and the people. I answered some of it, which is, I think number one is strengthen social cohesion, equality, rights. That is very important, because we need to not allow this space that Daesh is able to take advantage of, right? That's the first one. The second one is failed states, right? So if we look at what happened in Syria, in Libya, and so, I mean, we have to respond also to what is happening on the international scale to build strong states. We also need to look at how can, instead of, right now the main issue is the people that are returning back from conflict zones. And there is a dire need to work on rehabilitation and reintegration. That is a very important point. And rehabilitation, reintegration, not only with the people that have come back, but when we put the people back in those communities as well, for the community, because it's going to have a lot of stigma. So how can we make sure that there is a very solid, effective rehabilitation program, and how can we ensure that the communities are involved within the process of the rehabilitation? We need to rethink how can we build transformative and sustainable peace at a very local level as well, and understanding that there's a no one size fits all. So what might work for one country might not work for another. And sometimes what might work with one country in the south might be completely different from the north, because the grievances are different. So we really need to understand that and learn and listen to what the communities are saying.